Hi, boys and girls. I was staying after school today after you went home, and as I was looking around the room and looking in our classroom library, I was thinking about how there are so many books that I would like to read to you or that I would like for you to read, and I came up with an idea that I would take some books home and I would record myself reading them to you. That way, you could read the books or listen to the books at home. You could listen to the books that I'm reading to you during Daily Five, or you could even read them in the morning while we're in the computer lab. And so I thought about which author would I like to start with. So I chose my favorite author. His name is Chris Van Allsburg. And I chose this author because every time I read his books, I realize that nothing is as it seems. There's always a surprise in the book, or it always leaves me with asking questions and wanting to read on to find out the answers to the questions that I have as I read. So his books always draw me in and get me really excited about continuing to read. And you might be familiar with one of his most famous books, and that's The Polar Express. You probably have already read that and watched the movie. So I thought I'd start with another book. And this book is called Two Bad Ants. And even just starting looking at the title, I wonder, why are the ants bad? What can ants do that are bad? And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll do my best so that you can see the pictures. Let's see. The news traveled swiftly through the tunnels of the ant world. A scout had returned with a remarkable discovery, a beautiful sparkling crystal. When the scout presented the crystal to the ant queen, she took a small bite, then quickly ate the entire thing. She deemed it the most delicious food she had ever tasted. Nothing could make her happier than to have more, much more. The ants understood. They were eager to gather more crystals because the queen was the mother of them all. Her happiness made the whole ant nest a happy place. As I'm reading this, I immediately am asking myself, what is the crystal? And why does the queen ant love it so much? I can see that this is the queen ant right here because she has wings. The queen ant has wings. And this is one of the scouts. He doesn't have any wings. It was late in the day when they departed. Long shadows stretched over the entrance to the ant kingdom. One by one, the insects climbed out, following the scout, who had made it clear there were many crystals where the first had been found. But the journey was long and dangerous. They marched into the woods that surrounded their underground home. Dusk turned to twilight, twilight into night. The path they followed twisted and turned, every bend leading them deeper into the dark forest. I'm hoping you can see these pictures because they are wonderful illustrations. More than once the line of ants stopped and anxiously listened for the sounds of hungry spiders. But all they heard was the call of crickets echoing through the woods like distant thunder. Why would they be anxious? Why would they anxiously be listening for the sounds of hungry spiders? They were anxious, nervous, maybe scared. Dew formed on the leaves above. Without warning, huge cold drops fell on the marching ants. A firefly passed overhead that, for an instant, lit up the woods with a blinding flash of blue-green light. At the edge of the forest stood a mountain. The ants looked up and could not see its peak. It seemed to reach right to the heavens, but they did not stop. Up the side of the mountain they climbed, higher and higher. The wind whistled through the cracks of the mountain's face. The ants could feel its force bending their delicate antennae. Their legs grew weak as they struggled upward. At last, they reached a ledge and crawled through a narrow tunnel. When the ants came out of the tunnel, they found themselves in a strange world. Smells they had known all their lives, smells of dirt and grass and rotting plants, had vanished. There was no more wind, and most puzzling of all, it seemed that the sky was gone. Where do you think they are? They traveled up the mountain, through a tunnel. Where do you think they are? Let's find out. They crossed smooth, shiny surfaces, then followed the scout up a glassy, curved wall. They had reached their goal. From the top of the wall, they looked below to a sea of crystals. One by one, the ants climbed down into the sparkling treasure. Quickly, they each chose a crystal, then turned to start the journey home. There was something about this unnatural place that made the ants nervous. In fact, they left in such a hurry that none of them noticed the two small ants who stayed behind. Two small ants that stayed behind. And the title of the book is Two Bad Ants. I wonder if those two small ants that stayed behind are the two bad ants. Why go back? One asked the other. This place may not feel like home, but look at all these crystals. You're right, said the other ant. We can stay here and eat this tasty treasure every day, forever. So the two ants ate crystal after crystal until they were too full to move and fell asleep. So you have an idea of where they are. Do you have any ideas about what the crystals may be? Here's some more clues. Right now I'm wondering what is going to happen to those ants. They're in somebody's house. They fell asleep. What's going to happen? Daylight came. The sleeping ants were unaware of changes taking place in their newfound home. A giant silver scoop hovered above them, then plunged deep into the crystals. It shoveled up both ants and crystals and carried them high into the air. The ants were wide awake when the scoop turned, dropping them from a frightening height. They tumbled through space in a shower of crystals and fell into a boiling brown lake. Now I have to ask you, do you really think it was a boiling brown lake? Well, to them it was. What do you think the boiling brown lake really was? So this story is told from the ants' perspective. That means how they see things. So here they are in crystals. The big silver scoop carried them high through the air, and they fell into a boiling brown lake. A boiling brown lake. Then the giant scoop stirred violently back and forth. Crushing waves fell over the ants. They paddled hard to keep their tiny heads above water, but the scoop kept spinning the hot brown liquid. Around and around it went, creating a whirlpool that sucked the ants deeper and deeper. They both held their breath and finally bobbed to the surface, gasping for air and spitting mouthfuls of the terrible, bitter water. The terrible, bitter water. So it didn't taste good to them. So they put the crystals in the boiling hot brown water, and it didn't taste good. Have any more ideas about what it might be? Find out. Then the lake tilted and began to empty into a cave. The ants could hear the rushing water and felt themselves pulled toward the pitch black hole. Suddenly the cave disappeared, and the lake became calm. The ants swam to the shore and found that the lake had steep sides. They hurried down the walls that held back the lake. The frightened insects looked for a place to hide, worried that the giant scoop might shovel them up again. Close by, they found a huge round disc with holes that could neatly hide them. There's the cave. But as soon as they had climbed inside, their hiding place was lifted, tilted, and lowered into a dark place. When the ants climbed out of the holes, they were surrounded by a strange red glow. It seemed to them that every second the temperature was rising. It soon became so unbearably hot that they thought they would soon be cooked. But suddenly the disc they were standing on rocketed upward, and the two hot ants went flying through the air. So let's see. They were in holes, and they were lifted and placed into someplace with a strange red glow. It got hotter and hotter. And then whatever they were on rocketed upward, and they went flying through the air. Maybe the illustrations will help you. They landed near what seemed to be a fountain, a waterfall pouring from a silver tube. Both ants had a powerful thirst and longed to dip their feverish heads into the refreshing water. They quickly climbed along the tube. As they got closer to the rushing water, the ants felt a cool spray. They tightly gripped the shiny surface of the fountain and slowly leaned their heads into the falling stream. But the force of the water was much too strong. The tiny insects were pulled off the fountain and plunged down into a wet, dark chamber. They landed on half-eaten fruit and other soggy things. Suddenly the air was filled with loud, frightening sounds. The chamber began to spin. The ants were caught in a whirling storm of shredded food and stinging rain. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise and spinning stopped. Bruised and dizzy, the ants climbed out of the chamber. So the water ran in to something with half-eaten fruit and other soggy things, and then they whirled and twirled. A whirling storm of shredded food and stinging rain. Let's see if you can tell. Do you have any guesses as to what that was? The swirling, twirling. In daylight once again they raced through puddles and up a smooth metal wall. In the distance they saw something comforting. Two long, narrow holes that reminded them of the warmth and safety of their old underground home. They climbed up into the dark openings. But there was no safety inside these holes. A strange force passed through the wet ants. They were stunned, senseless, and blown out of the holes like bullets from a gun. When they landed, the tiny insects were too exhausted to go on. They crawled into a dark corner and fell fast asleep. So they were wet and they headed someplace they shouldn't have. Night had returned when the battered ants awoke to a familiar sound, the footsteps of their fellow insects. They were returning for more crystals. The two ants slipped quietly to the end of the line. They climbed the glassy wall and once again stood amid the treasure. But this time they each chose a single crystal and followed their friends home. Standing at the edge of their ant hole, the two ants listened to the joyful sounds that came from below. The ants knew how grateful their mother queen would be when they gave her their crystals. At that moment, the two ants felt happier than they'd ever felt before. This was their home. This was their family. This was where they were meant to be. So that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to answer all of the questions and figure out. I know he never says what the crystals are or exactly where they were, so you have to make some inferences. You have to look at the pictures, you have to listen to the words and the descriptions, all told from the point of view of the ants. A different perspective. I hope you enjoyed it.